You have control over your brand in terms of what you say and to a degree what you do, but it's people's perception of what you say and do that actually matters at the end of the day.
If you become protectionist, then it's all about how do we make sure that the brand is safe? How do we make sure that we don't lose any donors? How do we make sure that our staff are not impacted? But that's the wrong way around. If you need to be thinking, there's people who've been affected here. How can we focus on them first?
Welcome to this latest episode of CommsCast with Jersey Road. My name is Liam Flint and I'm Marketing and Communications Officer at Jersey Road PR. Once again, I'm joined by Managing Director Gareth Russell. Gareth, good to have you back on the podcast again. And we're talking about
having me.
Crisis, which I think you know a little bit about in your time.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, it's not necessarily us causing the crisis a lot of the time. Yeah, we're being a PR agency, we often have clients coming to us, sometimes because they want to prepare for potential crisis, sometimes because they're in the middle of one, sometimes because they've had one and they want to kind of reflect on how to learn from that. But it's often a very challenging season for clients. It's often one where they can be panicking. Sometimes they're just wanting the right advice, but hopefully we've been able to give a bit of wisdom over the years and help those through those crises.
Yeah, so we've titled this A Lesson in Crisis Comms. So we're going to get very practical, into detail, hopefully equip people, those comms professionals, on how not only they can solve a crisis, but actually prepare for one and hopefully prevent as well. And so to help us do that, we have very special guests. We have Sarann Buckby with us. Sarann, you're reputational management lead at Jersey Road PR. So you're going to be bringing us some wisdom. How are you feeling about this? You ready to go?
Yeah, ready, bring it on.
Ready to go, that's what we like. We have spent a fair bit of time, haven't we, just thinking about how we can best position this. And I think for starters, people have questions as to why does reputation actually matter? So from any kind of a comms or PR background, people might be saying, I haven't experienced crisis. Isn't this a bit dramatic? Why do I need to actually think about it ahead of time? So Sarann, do you want to just start by filling us in on what your day-to-day looks like? What's your role within the agency? That might help just shape this.
Sure. So my role is to help our clients, firstly of all, take a preventative approach to risk issue management and also crisis management. We'll get into it a bit later, but actually a lot of the crises that happen at the end of the day are known about, but I think our clients are just so busy with all the incredible work they're doing that they often don't have the time or just the headspace to think things through, and our role is to help them do that. Our role is also to help them prepare as well as they can for a crisis if it does happen. And I guess the final part of that is being able to respond well in a crisis and to think about things after that crisis has happened to make sure that all those learnings are taken stock of and you're actually becoming a more resilient and a more fit organization to be able to handle the increasing pressure and scrutiny that organizations are under today.
I mean, Gareth, I'm sure you agree with this. Sarann's role in the agency is pivotal, isn't it? And it's such an important area of agency life and in all agencies to understand the needs of clients and to nail the crisis, the plan. For you, when people ask that question of why does reputation matter so much, how should I prioritize it? What would you be saying are some of the basics that makes up the reputation and why we need to consider it so highly?
Well, I think reputation is of utmost importance. I think everything kind of stands or falls really on your reputation. The old phrase that, it takes years to build reputation, but a day to lose it. It's obviously quite biblical as well. The Bible talks about being of good reputation is better than being rich or wealthy. I think people give because of reputation. People volunteer because of reputation. People want to apply for jobs because of reputation. People want to serve and advocate because of reputation. So I think it's actually an area that's often delegated to the board because they have a governance role when it comes to reputation, but actually it's everyone's responsibility, and particularly in a world of social media, reputation is even more democratic. It's very much everyone's role and responsibility in an organization to build and value reputation.
I think that's really helpful because I think so often people think, okay, if something goes wrong, I will then get in touch with someone to come and help me, that it's a response rather than I'm going to preempt this and prepare firsthand. I don't think many people would think that as an obvious answer. But Sarann, for you, from a faith point of view, we work with faith organisations quite a lot at Jersey Road. How does that then underpin what reputation looks like? Because I know you've done some thinking around values and actually how we hold ourselves accountable, and that through the lens we see that is through a faith perspective, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Our clients cannot actually achieve their mission, and they potentially could harm their witness as a Christian organization if they don't take care and really think about their reputation, and not just within one tiny bit in their risk register, but I think in terms of how they live out their values, making sure that a lot of the values that you need to bring within a crisis or within risk issue management, things like honesty and transparency and humility, are all actually reflective of Christian values at the end of the day. So as Christian organizations, it should be natural to respond well within a crisis. But I think when you're in that sort of situation and the pressure is mounting, it's quite easy to panic. And that's why we really want to help organizations think about this ahead of time and to be prepared and able to really be a strong witness, not just in terms of their mission, not just what they do, but actually how they do it. Because a reputation is something that is assigned to you by others. So, you have control over your brand in terms of what you say and to a degree what you do, but it's people's perception of what you say and do that actually matters at the end of the day. And that could be real, it could be based on what you're doing and saying, or it could be based on their perception. Everyone comes into this world with a different lens, and that's why it's really important to be true and be led by your values, but also understand the values that your stakeholders have.
So reputation is assigned to you, that's what you're saying, but it's as a result of what you do. So I think that's really important to just comment on, because it does require work, and as Gareth said, it takes a long time to build. And I think sometimes we can underestimate how quickly we can undo the culture that we're working to build. But it is that what you put in, people then judge you and perceive you based on that. Absolutely.
And we know that trust is generally declining in the world that we live in. And even within the Christian world, there's less trust for leaders these days. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to be thinking about how do we build trust? And it's not just about if something goes wrong, but how do we proactively build trust? And as an agency, we're constantly trying to help our clients demonstrate the impact that they're having through incredible stories. So that's one aspect of it. It's being proactive and making sure that you're sharing those good things and building that social capital. Because I think when something negative happens, people are going to be more forgiving if you already have that presence within the marketplace, within the Christian world. And people know that, okay, you might have messed up on this particular issue, but at the end of the day, the general track record that you have is a good one, and that can definitely help you within a crisis.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think just establishing this foundation, I think you have to start with the importance of that reputation, don't you? And then from there, you can see, right, how do we protect that? What are some of the issues? So let's just move into that then with starting from the beginning. So let's, instead of going on solving the crisis, let's start with how we prevent crisis, because that, I think I speak from all of us, that is the gold standard. If we can help people to prevent a crisis in the first place and not have to then deal with one, then that is a win for all concerned. Gareth, from your point of view as managing director, obviously you've overseen a lot of clients over a number of years. What were some of the keys be in your mind? What are some of your thoughts on how people can guard against and protect themselves from falling into crisis? So there's some practical things you could give us.
I actually think it's important to differentiate between protecting your reputation and building a reputation. I actually think when you go into a mindset of protectionism, that's where the problems can start. So I don't think it is actually about protecting your reputation. I think it's about putting the right foundations in place so that your reputation can be built, and so that the values that Sarann's talking about are outworked through both the positive stuff you're doing and the programming you're doing and all that sort of stuff, but also through how you respond in a crisis. So preparation is key, and so it's about identifying what issues might you as an organization face, doing some scenario planning. What are some of the worst case scenarios? Sometimes people think we're a bit negative, Sarann and I, because we're always kind of thinking worst case scenario. But that's why you're bringing us in. You're bringing us in because you want, based on our experience, based on what we know, these are the areas that we could face. But what we find is that particularly at board level and exec level, that quite often those groups of people can agree on the general content and messaging content and approach of how they would want to respond in different types of crises, but they might disagree on how they want to present that publicly. And it's not like you always present things publicly. It's not like you always comment if the media come to you in the middle of a crisis. But if there are scenarios where you need to speak publicly, those are nuanced conversations around messaging, and it's really important that they're given breathing space to happen. So what we suggest to organizations is, don't just come to us when a crisis is kicking off. Don't just come to us when something is happening. Build in some time as a board, building some time as an exec, to really wrestle with some of these areas, to put together some messaging, to understand who the crisis team is, to understand what the processes are internally, and make sure that everyone's on board with that. So the right people know that this is where we're at, this is what the plan is. Because that's the other thing, a lot of organizations create a crisis plan, but then when the crisis happens, the right people or the people you need around the table weren't actually trained up in how to use it. And so it's making sure those people are aware of it. So I think the biggest practical thing you can do is be prepared. If you're prepared, then you are in a far better shape to respond in a way that, as again Sarann said, reflects your values, that builds your reputation with people, and that is also, if there have been victims involved, that's also victim focused. Because again, if you become protectionist, then it's all about how do we make sure that the brand is safe? How do we make sure that we don't lose any donors? How do we make sure that our staff are not impacted? But that's the wrong way around. If you need to be thinking, there's people who've been affected here. How can we focus on them first, make sure that they're supported, they're represented in our comms and our messaging, make sure that we're humble enough to realize that there have been some mistakes made and that we're willing to learn. And if you do all that, we've worked with clients who they've gone with that approach, and actually their reputation has been built genuinely. It can sometimes be a cliche from a PR agency to say a crisis is an opportunity for building a reputation, but we've had feedback from clients who've said we now have a stronger reputation because we dealt with that crisis in a good way.
Mm. Yeah.
Do you want to add off the back of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've pretty much covered it, Gareth. I would say just an interesting stat. Before COVID, up to 70% of crises that happened were actually known to the organization, which means that someone somewhere knew that this risk existed, but nothing was done about it. So it escalated into a crisis. Post-COVID now, it's around 54% of crises are known to clients, and that's because I think in the world we live in, it's more polarized. There's more sort of divisiveness and dissent, so we're facing that. But even so, that means that over half of the crises that could happen to your organization, you can actually do something about it now to prevent it from happening. So I think one of another great preventative step is to form a reputation management group where quarterly or, even if it's twice a year, you have people from the organization, those on the sort of coalface who are sort of meeting with the beneficiaries that you're serving, but also the leadership, and to have those different and diverse voices speaking into what are we seeing on the ground, or what are we seeing within the organizational culture that we think are red flags that potentially could develop into something. And if you start to, even as a leadership, really look at everything you're doing, every decision you're making with that reputational viewpoint, and underpinning that, as Gareth said, are your values, right? So is this decision in line with our mission and our values? And always asking yourself that question. Is this thing that we're about to do, have we thought about all the people that this could affect? And is that going to be, going to potentially reflect a gap between what we say are our values and what people are going to perceive as our values with this decision that we're taking? So I think that as comms leaders, it is tough sometimes to ensure that reputation is almost one of those priority things that are considered, not just the financial impact, whether it's negative or positive, but what is this going to do to our reputation? Because a reputation is something that is a long-term asset within your organization, and it's very easy to chip away at that value very quickly. So, yeah, I think that's important. And I think doing a health check of your organizational culture, another big one. Have you nurtured a healthy, open culture? Do they feel safe to raise issues and concerns? And do they feel assured that if they raise these issues and concerns, they're going to be listened to, and that things are actually, you're going to act upon that to make it better? Because I think, and often we're seeing more and more that issues are coming up internally because they haven't been addressed properly. So, there's so much that you can do now to make sure that your organization or your church is in a position to basically not even have to face the crisis in the first place. The best crisis is the one that you don't have to face. So do the work now and make the time to ensure that doesn't happen.
That happens. And is internal consultation within team enough? Or do you also need to listen to outside voices? What are people saying externally?
Absolutely.
Because I'm sure when the pressure's on, you want to go inside and contain. But actually, is there some listening that needs to be done out there as well?
Yeah. So that's part of what we do within our reputational audits is we help to do that wider scan, understand what is the culture and the general stance of the world, and how does your organization fit within it, and what are the issues, what are the things that are driving conversations on social media and within the media that could impact you. I think crisis maybe 10, 20 years ago used to be a lot about incident management. So, we have this fire or something's happening there, but more and more crisis is a result of issues coming up. So I mentioned that we're living in an increasingly polarized world, in a place where people are less trustful of institutions and organizations. So with that, the likelihood of an issue impacting your organization and of your organization becoming the focal point within a cultural war or something like that, it dramatically increases. So having that sort of approach of, is there someone on the wall looking out and understanding what's going on?
I think that's also helpful because it's very difficult to be objective when you're in the weeds, and when you're if you've been working for the organization particularly for a long time, you may not see some of the potential crises that could be facing you as an organization. So I think having both that scanning, but also just people who are outside of your organization speaking into, have you thought about this, have you thought about that, can be a very helpful exercise. Yeah.
So obviously prevention is paramount. We're saying that actually preparing is more than half the battle. That is absolutely key to minimizing anything happening. Of course, sometimes crises will happen, no matter how much you've prepared. That's just the way life goes. So if we move through to practical response then to people who maybe are watching and listening saying, right, I've already had a crisis and I'd love to know how to respond better when it does hit. Gareth, do you want to just give us a few kind of first indicators, practical things that we should do as a first response when this does hit us? What would you say from your experience?
Well, I think the first thing to say is do respond, like as in internally do something.
Yeah.
It's the crisis plan, hopefully you've got one, needs to kick in at that point. Don't just hope it goes away. So be first, be fast. I think also making sure you're very clear about who the different stakeholders involved are. So that could be the board, it could be donors, it could be internal staff, it could be volunteers, it could be victims if there are victims, it could be government. There's various other stakeholders that could be there, but map out those stakeholders, understand what is the priority for them, who needs to know what when, what's important, and then I would keep going back to values, but making sure that your values are represented through the comms that you're involved in. Again, this is not very objective because I run a PR agency, but I would suggest that you've got someone who is an expert in this area. So it might be you've got those people on your board, it might be you've got people on your staff team, it might be you have to bring in a fantastic PR agency who just so happen to be recording this podcast. But either way, don't try and just sort of wing it, because how you respond to a crisis can actually, if you don't respond well in a crisis, it can actually create a bigger crisis and a story where there didn't need to be one in the first place. So I think having those expert voices speaking into it is really, really important.
Yeah. I think also understanding when to hit the red button. So is this a risk issue that we're facing, or is this a crisis? So that's part of your crisis plan, and being really clear about what does a crisis look like for our organization. So you're not reacting, because that can and also be an issue. But I think also making sure that you're a trusted source. So when you do say something, make sure that you can back it up. Make sure that you don't have to backtrack later. Rather say less than say something that you're not 100% sure about, and that you're going to have to take back later on.
And I think one of the areas of that is actually just establishing the facts first.
Yeah.
So establishing what has actually happened, and doing that as quickly as you can. I'm not suggesting, do a 12-month investigation in order to wait until you say anything, but it's just to establish, has something happened? Is there any, what has happened? Who has it happened to? That sort of thing. Just making sure that there's some facts there, because if it's erroneous, then that's a different plan that you need to follow at that point. But if there is signs that something has happened, then you need to do something about it.
Yeah. The sort of there's a golden hour that you need to respond within a crisis, that
a media crisis particularly.
So between 60 and 90 minutes, although I think within social media, I think the rule is 15, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and then 90 minutes. So actually over communicating, because for a lot of people, that would be over communication in a crisis scenario. But what does that do? That shows that, hey, we're being transparent, we're on top of this, we're acknowledging the issue, even if we can't say anything more than, hey, we know this is going on. That's building confidence, that's building yourself as a credible source within a crisis, and that's really important to do. And then I think also keeping it simple, keep those messages simple, and make sure that you know who you're communicating to, and continue to, I think sometimes, say for example, in a cyber attack, the first thing you need to do is instruct people to say, okay, this is what you need to do. And then it might be sort of adjusting information that comes further on. And then I think, Gareth, the other thing that we find with clients is there are often a lot of grey areas and decisions that need to be made within a crisis. So that's why we talk about having a sort of true north, a strategic objective, where you as the first thing that you do while you're understanding the facts is decide, what do we want to do as an organization? How do we want to respond? How do we want people to reflect on our response? Thinking about our mission, thinking about our values.
You quite often talk about, in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, how do you want people to think about how you responded in this crisis? And I think that's a really helpful.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
And it's particularly helpful because when a crisis does hit, people are very laser focused on the detail and the now. It takes a deliberate act to think strategically at that point.
Yeah.
But it's a helpful challenge, I think, and it means that you make different types of decisions rather than just the knee-jerk reactions.
Yeah, and it can also help you where you like, what choice do we make? Do we do this? Do we do that? You go back to that true north. I mean, if you think about navigating, okay, now we have, Google Maps, but if we just think about the old-fashioned compass, unless you know where your true north is, you're going to get lost pretty quickly. And I think in a crisis situation where there's that intense scrutiny, that spotlight's on you, it becomes really easy to panic in that moment. So I think part of the way that you can keep calm and focused and on track within a crisis is having that set out.
Yeah.
I think you might need to explain what a compass is to some of our Gen Z listeners and watchers, but yeah.
I think it's an app on the phone.
Yeah,
So I think they'll be all
There's an
right.
app for everything. They'll be fine.
Yeah.
So on that issue of communication, I'd love to talk about the word sorry. So
Yes.
this is quite fascinating. I personally would love to know more about this, because there seems to be sometimes a negative connotation with admitting fault and actually putting your hands up and saying, despite all of this, we have made some error, whether it's in just delay of saying something, as you said, Gareth, like there needs to be an actual response, can't just sit on something. And there seems to be like, yeah, you're admitting guilt if you say sorry, and it's only going to go one way, so just be quiet, don't ever, take a backward step. What would you both say in response to that? Is there actually positive things behind actually fessing up to maybe areas you could have done better? Can people say sorry and still come out on top and still build reputation? What would you say?
I would say yes, absolutely. I think what clients often wrestle with is they hearing their legal team say, don't say sorry because that's admitting liability and fault. But I think there is a way that you can say sorry, even if at this point you're not able to, to go down that road. You can at least show that you're human, show that you have empathy, and say we are sorry that this has happened, and we're going to look into this and understand, what we need to do. And there've actually been cases in terms of civil case issues, for example, with a cybersecurity issue. If people have put a lawsuit to a company because of something that happened to their personal information, and the judge has actually looked more favorably on organizations that said sorry, because it was that organization was seen to be doing right by by those supporters or stakeholders. So even if it's something's not your fault, like a cybersecurity attack, being able to say, this is sorry. I mean, we will always say, also get your legal team to look at it, but there is a way that you can be human and say that you're sorry without, and in fact, I would say it goes a long way towards you actually coming out of the crisis well or not, because if you don't say that, that's often seen as a lack of accountability. And in terms of social media, it's going to be brutal if you don't take that first step, and people are going to be less likely to actually listen to you unless they've heard some sort of acknowledgement or apology in the first place.
I think there's also a way not to say sorry, and particularly when you see people saying "I'm sorry if." People have been, obviously we're saying if something has been found to have happened, then this is where this comes in. It's fair to say there are also malicious accusations of things that are not founded on truth that you need to kind of get to. That's why we say you need to get to the facts very quickly to understand what's happened. But I think the other way, the other thing that's is really important with saying sorry is a commitment to the actions of what that sorry looks like. So you also don't want sorry just to be a word or a phrase. You want it to be, and this is what we're going to do to make sure, or at least hopefully make sure this never happens again. So not only just saying sorry, but also giving very clear actionable next steps that show you're serious about it. So I think the wording and how you phrase that is really important. And the different situations call for different responses. So we're not saying that every single crisis, the first thing you should do is say sorry, because there are nuances. But when things have been found to have happened, and when you're needing to change, even if it's just something that an individual has done in your organization, there's still you still have to take ownership of that. You can't just delegate the blame.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah,
I
think that's the point where the other thing is where you seem to, well, I think that's probably going to be the next point, but where you seem to minimize an offence.
Yeah,
that can be
add to the crisis.
Yeah, definitely add to the crisis.
So if you were to make a plea right now to people who are watching this or listening to say, please don't do this in response to a crisis, if you could just get one or two things across, two massive don'ts from your expertise and your experience, what would you be advising people to steer well clear of in a response?
Do you want to go first?
No, you go.
I think that not taking control in the first place, adopting a wait and see attitude, if something is hit, if it's out there in the public square and you haven't immediately jumped on, you've lost your opportunity at the outset to have your voice heard. And I can tell you now that other people are going to jump into that vacuum and they're going to be saying things which might be helpful, they may be unhelpful. You just don't know. So the earlier you get your side of things into the story, into whether it's on social media or within the news stories, the better. And I think the other thing, is minimizing, I think what I said earlier, minimizing an offense, deflecting accountability, responsibility. It's going to add fuel to the fire. So don't do that.
I'd agree. I think they're the two most important things. I think it's also important that you learn in the process, that organizations learn from the experience. So I think once the crisis is over, once things are in place, once an investigation's been done, once the report's been published, all that sort of stuff, I think it's important that organizations take time to really assess what happened, what went well, what didn't go well, what do we need to change going forward, how does this apply to our crisis plan, and what advice do we need to make this even better. But I think those two areas that Sarann said are probably the two most important don'ts.
Can I add a third one? And that is
actually a fourth one, because I said one.
Sorry, fourth one. I think understanding how the relationship dynamics within the internal team could potentially cloud your judgment, your actions, the words you say. I think understanding what that looks like, understanding, do we have a culture that is going to be open to responding well, is the other thing that, because I think what we have seen is sometimes, and this is why people bring us in, is having that outside voice can be helpful in terms of navigating things. If you're in the forest of a crisis, having someone who's outside and who has maybe an external perspective, I think can help, especially if there are difficulties within the internal dynamics.
And I'm sure just the reality is when you've dealt with so many of the cases, you'll be able to relate. But when you're in the thick of a crisis, it just must quite often feel like I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know whether to respond or not. I don't know where the facts are. How is this going to land? Ultimately, what's the public opinion going to be at the end of this? So if we were to encourage people, I'd love to know, a final question that I can put to you guys is, do you believe there's opportunity and something positive can come out of a crisis, however that plays out? And have you seen that happen? Have you seen it within the clients we work with in your history? Is there always something we can do positively?
Yeah, well, I think when you look at crisis generally around all the stuff we've talked about, so the preparedness as well as response in a crisis, the opportunity in terms of being prepared is that you hopefully don't have a crisis. So not that it's a fail-safe, but certainly when your antennae is up for what could happen, then you tend to put in the safeguarding processes to make sure you mitigate them ever happening. So that's the opportunity for being prepared. That's why we keep pushing it down people's throats to some extent, this preparedness bit, because it's so important that people are organizations are prepared. But there is, I do think there's a real opportunity for organizations to respond well in a crisis as well. And we have, we've got one client who they had a very public crisis. They could have been a real issue for them and for their donor base and for for the program work that they were doing. But they have said to us that they have seen that their reputation is better now than it was before the crisis. Wow. So I don't think they would have wanted the crisis. I don't think they would have chosen that. But because they were very clear, they responded quickly, they were victim focused, they kept everyone, all the stakeholders in the loop along the journey. They'd handled it in a really good way, and that has really built their reputation, and it hasn't affected their long-term, it hasn't had a long-term impact.
That's encouraging. Sarann, final word to you on that.
Yeah, I think the way you respond either builds trust or it doesn't. And the opportunity is, as always, you want to be building trust. So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. It's who you say it to at the right time, in the relevant channel. I think being sure to also then understand, okay, how do we learn from this? How do we move forward? Again, how do we become a more resilient organization as things become more difficult? How do we actually be more resilient, and what can we take forward to be a stronger organization and to ensure that we keep our focus on our mission, and the way that we're doing it is values led.
Brilliant. I think that's a fitting way, nice way to end. So yeah, thank you both so much for your insight. I know it's a deep topic. There's so much more we could say. But yeah, just thank you so much, Sarann, for sharing all of that with us, and Gareth, obviously, as well. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you feel like you want to get to know more about who we are at Jersey Road, you can head over to our website at jerseyroadpr.com, and you can also check us out across social media.